Okay, so let's talk about classes. What is a class? A class is a blueprint for creating objects. When classes are created, the object is called the instance of the class. Classes make it easier to reuse code through inheritance and also allows you to group related objects. The syntax for creating a class is the class keyword. You type the class keyword first, then followed by the class name, then curly brackets. Your code goes inside the curly brackets. The name of the class by convention must be a capital and it follows the same rules as naming variables. The only difference is that with classes by convention, they always have to start with a capital letter. Apart from that, any other rule governing variable naming applies to classes. You can't name a class with a begin with a number or something. Yeah, you can't name a class beginning with a number. Just like how you name variables. That same rules apply here. Just that to be able to differentiate between a class and normal variable or a function, you always begin with a capital letter. So here is an example of a class called points. So this class has two instant variables. Or instant variables are variables inside a class. They are called instant variables because every time a new object is created, or every time there is a new instance of that class created, these variables hold different data. So let's say for the first instance of the class, the x is being assigned to 3. The second instance, it can be assigned to a different value, maybe 4 or 5. So with each instance, there is a different data assigned to these variables. That's why they are called instant variables. We have other type of variables inside class called the static variables. We'll look at that one later. Now we are talking about the instance variables. Then we have here a default constructor. We'll look at that one very soon. Objects. Like when I was explaining what classes are, I kept on mentioning objects. So what is an object? Objects are abstractions of real-world entities that can be manipulated in a computer program. Objects are defined by their class, which determines the kind of data that they contain and the methods used to manipulate that data contained in them. The difference between a class and an object is a class is a concept or an idea, while an object is a specific realization of that concept. A class defines general characteristics and behavior of a particular type of object, while an object is a specific instance. Like I was saying with the instance variables, a specific instance of that class with its own unique states and behavior. So every object, welcome to over here. So every object will have a unique data for these variables. So that's an object. That's the difference between a class and an object. Over here is an object from the point class. You see, we have over here. This one is an instance variable x and another instance variable y. Then when you create an object from the point class, you have the object called p. You can have another object called maybe b. We can have another object b, and that object b would also have a different values. You see over here, these values 1 and 2, they are assigned to x and y respectively. So 1 is being assigned to x and 2 is being assigned to y. When we create a different object or we create a different instance, we can assign different values to them, and they will all be referenced by these same variables x and y. So that's what objects are. We move on to classes. Constructors. A constructor is a special type of function A constructor is a special type of function that is called when an object is created from a class. A constructor is a special type of function that is created when an object is created from a class. They are used to initialize the state of an object by setting the initial values of its instance variables. There are two types of constructors, unnamed constructors, also called the default constructors. And we saw example of a default constructor here. So, over here, you have a default constructor here. We will look at that very soon in the text editor. So we saw what a default constructor is here. We have a default constructor, or also known as unnamed constructors, and we also have named constructors. The unnamed constructors are default constructors that are automatically provided by the Dart compiler if no other constructors are defined in the class. So by default, every time you create a class, it has a constructor. It's there. Every time you create a class, the constructor is being provided by the Dart compiler. Let's take a look at that one and come back to the slides and see. Let's see how it works. Okay. So let's start from classes. What is a class? Like we said over here, class is a blueprint for creating objects. So to create a class, let's say we have this class students. So classes are most of the times we refer to classes as real life objects. In programming, we always see things like points, int, all these are classes. This int class is a bigger class that refers to any number. So each time you reference a number, you are referring to this int class. But sometimes we want to represent real life objects in our real life entities in our code. But these real life entities are not provided by the Dart compiler. For instance, let's say you want to represent a student in your code. The Dart compiler automatically doesn't have a class called student. For instance, over here, this Dart class and this int class over here, it says it's an abstract class int that extends number, and this num is also another class that extends something. So almost everything in that is a class, or they call it objects. Almost everything is an object in class. So all these are types of classes. But sometimes we want to create our own class because the things that we are trying to reference or the things that we are trying to represent in our programs are not provided by the Dart compiler. So for instance, if you want to represent a student, a student can read, a student has an index number, a student has a name, a program. All these things by default doesn't come with the Dart compiler, so you would have to create it yourself, and that's where classes comes in. So to create a class, you just have the class keyword followed by the name of the class, And like I said, you should always start with a capital letter. If you try to write create a class with a small letter, you see there's a blue squiggly line here that will tell you to use upper camel case. So by convention, when you use a small letter, it wouldn't show an error, but this is the secret way of naming a class. So let's see. So we have a class called students. So we all know students. For a student has every student has an index number. Index number should have been strange. Yeah. Every student has an index number, and every student has a name. Okay. And what else? Okay, let's take these two. So every student has an index number, and these ones are what we call an instance variable. This is also an instance variable. Apart from index number and name, which are variables, every student has things that he does. As a student, you read, you write exams, you do all sorts of things. So these functions, these things that students do inside the class, we call them methods. So every student can read. So that would be one method. This is a method. So every student can read, and a student can also write. So read and write are some of the things that a student can do. So to reference this class, we can just, to create an object of this class, we can come into our main function. You see, the main function is where the code is being run. We could have created this class inside a different file and imported it here, then we write everything here. Maybe we'll do that, we'll try that one in our next meeting. So when we come here, we can create a new student object. Earlier, I told you guys that all these things, ints, strange, they are all strange ints, they are all classes. So, and we've also created our own class. Most of the times, you would want to use something. Most of the times, people use var instead of the name of the class, but we know the name of the class. Let's use that one. So strange. This is our custom defined class. So we know students, and we give the name of the object. Let's say student 1. Student 1 is equal to new students. So this is an example of an object. We just created an object of the class students, and this object will be referenced as student 1. Now there's new. So for people coming from C++, no, I think Java. From Java background, we have new. Over here, you can remove the new. It's not necessary. With the new that updates, it's not necessary. At first, it was with that 2.0 earlier versions. The new was required, but right now, with the new update, it's not required, so you can just remove it. So we've created how do you call it, an object of the class students. So we can just say student 1 dot to access this instance variable. So every instance of this class, you see, let me give it a name. Let's say so student 1's name is called Winfrey. Student 1's student 1's index number is 54372. We can create another object. We can create another instance of the class over here and name it maybe student 2. And we can assign different values to that. And just say student 2. You see, every object has specific data, but they are all using the same variables. They need the same name, the same index number, but each instance has its unique set of data. So let's say if you try to print the data over here, say maybe you see over here it says student one is called student one dot name, student two is called student two dot name. Over here it says in that you can't create an empty variable. So over here we can just get this, we can initialize these variables by just providing them with some dummy data. There's an empty string, a 0. So when we run this application, you see student 1 is called Winfred and student 2 is called Mike. Just like we did here. So each instance, each object has specific data assigned to the variables. And they can all access, each object can access these methods. So you can, let's say we write something here, maybe over here when you print, oh okay, that's right. So method read says student is reading. So we can come here and say, we can come here and print students. See, the methods are here. So student 2 dot read. And when we print this, sorry. Where is this error coming from? I don't know.
It's already printing, so try student 2 dot read.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so when we run this one, it says, yeah, thank you, Alec. I was confused for a minute. So it says student 2 is reading. So each instance can access the methods and the variables that are being created inside the class. So what else? Okay, so let's move on to constructors. I guess we are done with the basics of classes. Let's go to creating constructors. Okay, so over here, when we created the class, we didn't create any constructor. By default, these when you create a class, by default, the Dart compiler provides it with a default constructor called that's the unnamed constructor. But you can also create your own constructor. Let's say you can create a constructor, or maybe constructors are used to initialize variables or data every time an instance of that class is being called. So let's say you want the class to do something specific each time an instance or an object is created. That's where you can create your own specific constructor. That's the named constructor. Okay. So let me. So over here, you see, it says these ones are not initialized. It says the index number and the instance variable name and instance variable index number are not initialized. So in that you can't create empty variables. So you first have to initialize it, and we can do that with the constructors. And rule number one of creating a constructor and rule number one of constructors is that they must have the same name as the class itself. You can't create a constructor with a different name. So with this one, the class name is student. So the constructor is also going to be called student. That's how constructors work. There are special functions that are being called each time an instance or an object is created. But these special functions don't have return types. Constructors don't have return types. You can't say something like void or string or int, whatever. You don't have return types. You just type the name of it. You type the name of the class. That will be the name of the constructor. And inside the curly brace, you assign the data that will be initialized to the variables. So over here, we can say something like you first have to bring the name of. You will first have to bring a parameter to something like int index number, int name. And over here, sorry, wait, we have to bring this one here. So over here, we use the this keyword. This keyword is used to reference the specific instance or the specific object that is being referred to. So the this, let's see over here, this dot name will refer to Winfred, and over here this dot name will refer to Mike. So this is used to reference the instance of the class. So over here, when we say something, this dot index number equals index number, then this dot this whole thing is unnamed constructors. And this is called the unnamed constructor. This is how by default constructors are being made. But you see, we have errors here with the new that if you have earlier versions of that installed on your machine, you wouldn't get an error in this one. But with the new ones, you can't do it this way. And if you've done Python before, you'd be familiar with this one. Just create a class, then you do this dot, this equals that, this. But with the new that, you can't do it this way. You can't do it this way because this dot index number is referencing this index number. They're almost the same things, like you're referencing this equals this. So instead of typing this redundancy, you can just come here and this is how constructors are created in that programming language. It's almost like this first one that I created. Like this, it's just like this. This is how it's being done. This is how it's being done back in old versions of that. But with the new ones, you can't do it this way. So you will have to do it like this. To initialize the index number and the name. So this is a default a default constructor. You can have a name. You have to type the name of the class, but bring the name that what you want as fee, send of fees. Over here to initialize this student is being underlined. It says field instances, field index number must be initialized, and the name too must be initialized. But they are not initialized there, so you can do the same thing here. You can say fees dot student of fees will be the name of the name constructor. So when you do this, you've initialized the instant variables here. So when you come here, it says. So after one thing I need to talk about this. That's why I'm confused. One thing you need to know is when you create what do you call it? Constructors. You can't you can't do this student2.name. You can only how do you call it? Pass in the parameters here. That's why it says over here, it says 2 positional arguments expected but 0 found. So you have to type the name of the student. The index number comes first, followed by the name. So you have to say index number, followed by the name, which will be over here. You've assigned values to the instance variable, but you did it. You assigned the values while creating the whilst creating the objects. So after this, you can still come and say student name dot something else. You can come and say you can still come here and say this and 2.name equals bright or any other name. But over here, like I said, constructors are used to initialize. So when you create this, when you create a constructor and you create an object. When you create an object, you need to initialize that object with some variable, some data. So these are the data that are being provided every time you create the object. So you can't create an object with empty variables like we did here. You see over here, there is nothing. So we had to do something like index number equals empty string, index number equals 0, then strange name equals an empty string. You wouldn't have to do that. So once you have this, each time you create an instance of the class, you pass in your data. See, so over here when we created the student 2, we passed in values Winfred and this index number. But after creating the object, we came back to give it a different name. That's why bright is being printed instead of Winfred. But if you remove or if you comment this one out and run it, you see that it's a print Winfred. Okay, so that would be it for constructors. Let's go back to the slides and see if I couldn't talk about something. Let me see. Okay, so we've talked about unnamed constructors and named constructors. Like example, like I showed you earlier, this is how it is done with the named constructors and unnamed constructors. But with the newer versions of that, you can't do this. You would have to when this dot x over here inside the parameters as parameters over here without the curly brackets and this dot x equals x, it makes it redundant because all these things are referencing the same thing. So when you do this with the new versions of the DAT SDK, you might get errors, but with the earlier ones or the earlier versions, there wouldn't be any errors. So that will be it for today.